This is not vengeance. Revenge is not a valid motive, it's an emotional response. No, not vengeance. Punishment.
You're such a special boy. Who is Otto Krieg? Who are the people who work for him? Who are his friends? Who would stand to make money from this deal? Tell me.
We can't talk about the case, Mr. Saint.
His name's Frank Castle, senior agent. His alias, connections, apartments in Europe, none of it was real. You have your chance. He's leaving for England next week, and he's at a family reunion in Puerto Rico.
This is the first family reunion we've had in 5 years. And that's too long. That's too long.
This is interesting.
Get down, buddy, get down! Run, honey!
Mother and father send their regards.
Castle?
Where have you been?
It's been 5 months since my family was killed. I don't see one man in jail.
Maybe he's still alive because he was meant to suffer more, I don't know. But how can we make him suffer if we can't find him?
We're really sorry.
About what?
Get there.
About your family.
I'm over it.
Those who do evil to others, the killers, the rapists, psychos, sadists, you'll come to know me well. Frank Castle is dead. Call me the Punisher.
The Punisher exploded onto the big screen on the 16th of April in 2004 in the USA and made its way to the UK on the 24th of September. Directed by screenwriter Jonathan Hensley, making it his directorial debut. Produced for $30 million, it recouped around $54 million worldwide, making it a moderate success, and was viewed as pretty poor box office compared to the upwards trend of the other Marvel films around that time that were making 3 times that amount. But The Punisher would find a larger audience on DVD, bringing in over $60 million in sales. Critics weren't too keen on Jonathan Hensley's take on The Punisher, with Roger Ebert awarding it 2 stars out of 4, stating, "The Punisher is so grim and cheerless. You wonder if even its hero gets any satisfaction from his accomplishments." Variety described the film as depressingly routine and sometimes laughably silly, but they praised Thomas Jane for his appropriate physicality and brooding gravitas. But they criticised John Travolta, saying he does nothing to inject fresh life into a bland archetype. Empire magazine awarded it 2 stars out of 5, saying first-time director Jonathan Hensley is hampered by the excess of the 80s, which rendered the one-man army genre ridiculous. Commando, anyone? Despite being boxed in by a tight budget, Hensley does at least bring Castle into the real world, with some inventive and brutal fight scenes. Ain't it cool news? Critic Head Geek said, "I loathe this film. This is everything that we've grown past in the 6 years of comic book cinema. The tone is all over the place, the characters thinly drawn caricatures, and a story resembling nothing of the original. This is a complete disaster, a turd, a blight upon Marvel's good name. I preferred Corman's Fantastic Four to this, that at least had moments that make me happy." The Punisher would eventually be followed up with a sequel, though with a different creative team and cast, with Punisher Warzone in 2008, with Ray Stevenson in the lead, which failed at the box office. The Punisher would be introduced in the second season of Daredevil in 2016, with John Bernthal as Castle. John would receive his own series in 2017 to 2019 that received mixed reviews, and recently returned in a one-off special on Disney Plus titled One Last Kill, in lead up to his appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day. The Punisher made his comic book debut in 1974 in issue 129 of Amazing Spider-Man, created by writer Jerry Conway and artists John Romita Sr. and Ross Andru. Frank Castle was originally depicted as an assassin and adversary of Spider-Man. Conway was inspired by The Executioner, a popular book series created by author Don Pendleton, in which a Vietnam veteran Mac Bolan becomes a mass murderer of criminals after the mafia-related deaths of his family. Conway also took some inspiration from The Shadow, a character he thought was a law unto himself. The Punisher deviated from the norm compared to Marvel's other characters, and by the late 80s he was part of a wave of troubled anti-heroes, making him appealing to older readers who wanted more than just a traditional colourful hero. During the 1970s, Marvel had started licensing out their superheroes for TV with Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk, but they wanted a slice of the big screen action like DC Comics, as the only superhero who had successfully made the transition from TV to film was Superman in 1978 and the following sequels. During the mid-80s, Canon Films grabbed the rights to Spider-Man and Captain America, but Spider-Man would never get off the ground, and Captain America would be delayed until 1990, when Menachem Golan left the Canon Group to set up his new company, 21st Century Films. In 1987, New World Pictures had acquired Marvel Entertainment and sought about developing a film based on The Punisher, and the film would hit cinemas in October of 1989, with Dolph Lundgren in the lead and with well-known film editor Mark Goldblatt directing. The film received mixed reviews, but did perform well financially, but New World Pictures was struggling as a company, so it didn't hit every country theatrically, especially the USA, and most people found it on VHS. Fans were disappointed that Dolph's version didn't have the skull on his chest, and with it not being set in New York, as it was quite clearly filmed in Australia, it didn't feel faithful to the source material. The film had the violence though, which pleased action fans, and it also came with a cracking film score by composer Dennis Dirith. Dolph may have looked asleep at the wheel throughout the film, and perhaps his acting was not up to scratch at this point in his career, but he struck an imposing figure on screen, making him a force to be reckoned with. Marvel would begin to face cash flow problems, but would be saved through licensing during the 90s thanks to toys, video games and cartoons. They would find success with Blade in 1998 through distributor New Line Cinema, and this continued with X-Men under Fox and Sony Pictures with Spider-Man. Discussions had begun about developing a new Punisher film as early as 1997. In 2000, Marvel made a long-term agreement with Artisan Entertainment to adapt 15 of their characters into films and TV shows, but only 2 productions were made under this partnership, with The Punisher and Man-Thing. Gale Ann Hurd had a connection to Marvel, having held the movie rights to The Incredible Hulk since 1990. Her production company was brought on to produce The Punisher under a deal made between Marvel and Artisan. Gale's husband, Jonathan Hensley, was given the job as director in April 2002. He wasn't familiar with the character, and was given the comic Welcome Back Frank by Garth Ennis from Marvel. He read it, loved it, and took the job immediately. Jonathan was no stranger to action, having specialised as a screenwriter, penning the scripts to Die Hard with a Vengeance, Jumanji, The Saint, and Armageddon. Jonathan would take inspiration from 2 Punisher comic book stories, Welcome Back Frank and The Punisher Year One. Jonathan envisioned an action film that felt like it was from the 1970s. What if the great directors of that decade, such as Don Siegel or John Frankenheimer, were to make a superhero film? John wanted a gritty urban take on the character, with spaghetti western vibes. This approach would be ideal due to the budget restrictions he was under. He had hoped for $64 million and ended up with $30 million. In the audio commentary for the film, he mentioned the action films that he tended to work on had a budget of around $90 million. The Punisher would become an exercise in economy. For the cast, we have Thomas Jane as Frank Castle Jr., aka The Punisher. Thomas took on the role as he was drawn to Tim Broadsheet's comic artwork and the character's status as an anti-hero rather than a traditional superhero. After initially declining the part twice, he eventually accepted the role and got Michael Mello, a combat weapons trainer, to help him with the guns and knives so he looked confident on screen using them, and he gained over 35 pounds of muscle to prepare. Years later, Jane publicly reflected on the role, stating that he felt miscast from the beginning. He noted that Frank Castle is traditionally an Italian with different lineage, and he expressed happiness that the role eventually went to John Bernthal, whom Jane felt was a much better fit for the character. John Travolta plays crime lord Howard Saint, who was not from the comics. Travolta developed his character, adding an extra level of creepiness, which the director said he showcases during the morgue. Travolta wanted to come across as menacing without doing much at all. Jonathan Hensley asked John to play his character like a Roman emperor. Originally, they were going to make use of the character Microchip along with Jigsaw, but they were excised from later drafts because of Hensley's distaste for them. The director explained, "There are a couple of years where I didn't want to go. Microchip, the battle van, all that stuff. where it got really high-tech. We're not going there at all. I deemed that too complicated, too lacking in the spirit of the sort of urban vigilante. The Punisher doesn't just go around blowing people away. He uses guile and cunning just as much as he does weaponry and physical combat. Will Patton plays Quentin Glass, Saint's right-hand man, who does his dirty work, but Quentin has a secret that the Punisher uses to his advantage. The director was so happy Will signed on to the film, as he was a huge fan of his work. Samantha Mattis plays Maria, Frank's wife. Hensley wanted an actress who could connect with the audience almost immediately, as they wouldn't have a lot of time with her, so they had to connect in a short amount of scenes, and he felt Samantha had that quality. The late Roy Scheider plays Frank's father. Roy was one of the director's favourite actors, and he was his neighbour at one point when they lived in Manhattan. Roy, as usual, is rocking a crazy tan. Russell Andrews plays Jimmy Weeks, Frank's partner in the FBI, who due to his gambling addiction gets into trouble and is forced to reveal Frank's whereabouts and family. Russell had been acting since the early 90s, appearing in TV shows and made the transition to film. Outside of film work, he is the founding member of Stage Walkers Productions, a multi-award-winning Los Angeles-based stage company. Rebecca Romaine plays Joan, a waitress who shares a building with Frank. Rebecca was no stranger at this point to the superhero genre, having already played Mystique in X-Men. Ben Foster plays Dave, who seems to waste his days playing video games, and shares the building with Frank and Joan. Ben also appeared in another Marvel movie not long after The Punisher, playing Angel in X-Men The Last Stand in 2006. The late stand-up comedian John Panette plays Bumpo, a passionate cook who is close friends with Dave and shares the building with him and Joan. Bumpo, like the others, becomes suspicious of Frank's activities and attempt to befriend him. Laura Harring plays Livia, Howard Saint's wife. Laura started her career as a model and won Miss USA in 1985. She started acting in 1987 with her first movie Silent Night, Deadly Night 3. Her career would take off during the late 90s, and she got to work with David Lynch, starring in Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire. James Carpinello plays as Bobby and John Saint. They aren't twins, as Bobby is the youngest brother, who ends up getting killed in the FBI bust, and John gets his revenge on Frank's family. To make them look different, Bobby was given a mustache and slick back hair. Eddie Jemison plays Mickey, a drug dealer turned lackey, whose actions get Bobby killed. The Saints don't kill Mickey but make his life miserable, so he eventually joins Frank to bring down the Saints. Eddie's breakthrough was with Ocean's 11 in 2001, and he appeared in the sequels. His most recent film was in Nope. Country music singer Mark Colley plays Harry Heck, a musician and hitman hired by Saint to kill Castle. Mark mainly focuses on his music career, but started popping up in movies in 1997 with Fire Down Below, and he even appeared in an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger. Kevin Nash plays the Russian, a beefcake hitman hired by Saint to kill Castle at his hideout. The Russian and how he dresses is from the comics. Kevin was a pro wrestler at the time and could deal with the stunt work, but Thomas Jane would be no slouch in this area and did a lot of his own stunts during the elaborate fight scene. It would actually be Tom himself getting thrown through the wall and smashing it into another wall in one shot. Incredibly impressive, but Tom would get doubled when it was deemed too dangerous by Mike Owen. The most dangerous stunt would end up being Frank and the Russian smashing through the stairwell and hitting the wall on the way down. Principal photography began in early August of 2003 in Tampa, Florida, with filming wrapped after 52 days ending in October. Frank Castle operated in New York, sharing the same enemies as Spider-Man and Daredevil in the comics, but due to the cost of filming in New York at the time, it was out of the question, so they settled on Florida, which would be a controversial choice with the fans. Making use of Florida, they would get a lot more for their money. With the script dealing with drugs that were being shipped across the Gulf of Mexico, Jonathan said it made sense for the villains to operate their money laundering in Tampa. For the location, they made use of a bank in Tampa for the exterior and the main lobby of the bank for the nightclub. The extra rooms within the club were built on a soundstage. The House of the Saints was owned by an ex-NBA player. As they filmed in Florida, they had the inconsistent weather, with it sunny one moment and then chucking it down with rain the next. But they also had to deal with the extreme heat, as they filmed during the summer, with temperatures daily hitting 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If you notice in a number of shots, Thomas Jane has a bruised thumbnail. He got it jammed in a car door before shooting, and at the time they couldn't fix it to paint it out, and didn't have the funds later on to use CG to clean it up, so they left it in. With only $15.5 million going towards the shooting budget and post-production for the film, in efforts to save more money, Jonathan worked with a storyboard artist focusing on the action scenes to keep the cost down. Jonathan would adjust his script and rewrote scenes to reduce the cost during the shoot, but also reduce the amount of coverage, cutting out any flashy camera work and playing out scenes in one take. Frank's extended family, who get shot at the beginning, were made up of stunt performers. Jonathan didn't want to squib up the actors, as he didn't want to traumatise the audience too early on, as it was already a dark sequence and having blood everywhere would have been too much, but also the MPA ratings board would have probably had some issues with that. Stuntman expert Gary Himes would operate as the stunt coordinator on The Punisher. Gary knew they were working on a tight budget, so they paid close attention to the storyboards. Jonathan Hensley wanted everything filmed within camera, no digital enhanced or CGI sequences. As John said, once he saw an action scene have CG applied, it didn't look real. But he would have to make a compromise and use CG to spice up Howard Saint's death as the cars explode. After shooting had wrapped, Lionsgate Films purchased Artisan, resulting in them assuming distribution before the film's release. In an interview, Jonathan said that though the film was distributed under the Lionsgate imprint, the film was still considered an Artisan film, as Lionsgate had nothing to do with the production and greenlighting even before the merger. Doing the editing, Hensley had to make cuts to keep the runtime down to a suitable length, so a lot of Frank's partner Jimmy Weeks' storyline was cut way back, and some additional dialogue scenes. But all of these deleted scenes would be restored for the DVD. For the film's story, mafia boss Howard Saint's son Bobby is hoping to impress his father by doing his own deal to acquire weapons, but it turns out to be an FBI bust, which leads to Bobby being killed along with the gun smuggler Otto Krieg. However, Krieg's death was faked, and he's later revealed to be an undercover FBI agent Frank Castle, who was on his final mission before retirement. Howard is furious and wants to find out who killed his son, and to dig into the history of Otto. Howard's right-hand man, Quentin, bribes corrupt police officers and discovers Otto was just a cover, and he wasn't killed. His real name is Frank Castle, and they discover he's on a family reunion in Puerto Rico. Saint orders Castle to be killed, and Saint's wife Livia insists that Castle's entire family be killed as well. Saint's men, including Quentin and Bobby's older brother, unleash hell on Frank's family. Frank's wife and son manage to escape the shootout, but are chased by Saint's men. Frank escapes, killing the remaining hitmen at the property, and grabs a motorbike to get to his wife and son, but he is too late. Maria! Frank holds his wife and son in his arms as Saint's men turn up, and Frank is beaten and shot. He is left for dead as they blow up the dock. Castle, however, survives and is nursed back to health by a local fisherman. 4 months pass with everyone believing Castle is dead, but he surprises the police turning up at the station demanding why no one is behind bars for the murder of his family. Castle moves into an abandoned apartment occupied by 3 oddball characters, Joan, Bumpo and Dave, and begins his mission to take revenge on the Saints by serving his own type of justice. The Punisher would receive an extended cut in late 2006, which added about 15 minutes, bringing the final runtime to 140 minutes. It primarily fleshes out the mob's plot and the deep betrayal by Frank Castle's best friend Jimmy Weeks. The extended cut would feature a new animated opening sequence in Q8 to expand on a friendship between Jimmy and Frank. This was intended to be filmed, but was removed due to budget cuts. They photographed the actors in front of a green screen and comped them into a war zone background, and with Photoshop adjusted the grading to match the comic in its visual style. Jonathan saw this sequence as a fantasy as to what could have been if they had the money during production. For the other additional scenes, we see Howard Saint's mob leverage and coerce Jimmy into giving up information on Castle's family. There are additional party scenes involving Saint, but the meat of it is restored conversations between Frank and Jimmy. The standout piece and darkest scene is Frank coming face to face with Jimmy to make him explain his actions. Frank doesn't kill him, but makes Jimmy commit suicide for what he has done. The extended version does result in the movie being a bit too long for its own good. We aren't being delivered more action, just more meat to the dialogue, and it strengthens the friendship between Frank and Jimmy's eventual betrayal. The theatrical cut didn't feel too compromised. You could follow the beats of the story easily and you still felt informed. This cut just adds a bit more drama for the fans. It's not to say it's not worth watching, but it does feel a bit baggy, but the option is there if you are in the mood. The score to The Punisher would be composed and conducted by Italian composer Carlo Ciliotto. The director wanted the music to be a sad and mournful score that would undercut the drama, and he was aware of Carlo's previous work, which led to him being chosen. Originally, Carlo thought that it was unusual for an action movie director to want to use an Italian musician for his project, and stated that the entire work process was stress-free due to Hensley being a fan of his work, but the director did request the Big Hero theme at the end be dropped, as it didn't feel in keeping with The Punisher and the rest of the movie. So they removed it and kept in just a sound effect of the wind playing on the soundtrack. The Punisher would also have songs featured in the film from artists such as Nickelback, Seether and Evanescence, and was released as a separate album that sold well, shifting 500,000 copies. The score has all the vibes of a western and is very Italian, and it fits very well with the tone and the direction the director is going with the story, but I've never found myself going back to it like the score to the Dolph Lundgren film. Carlo Siliotto's score is very unique, and an original approach to the comic book genre, but it is missing some of the fun, bombastic action cues you come to expect from the action genre. It has some decent cues throughout, don't get me wrong, but the score wasn't entirely my cup of tea. A year after the film was released, THQ published the Punisher video game that would have Thomas Jane return to provide his voice. The game would follow the comics as you play in a third-person perspective as you gun down your enemies and torture them for information. The game was heavily criticised for its gore. The developers rendered the interrogation scenes in black and white in order to reduce their visual impact. The UK release would be slapped with an 18 rating from the BBFC, who also requested some minor cuts. The game sold very well, with reports of 1 million copies being sold across the PS2, Xbox and PC. The game, however, received mixed reviews, criticising the game's linear and repetitive gameplay, but it was praised for its system of torture and the storyline. I had the game on the original Xbox and still have a copy. I enjoyed it at the time, but I don't recall ever completing it. It had all the violence of Max Payne and the look, but it didn't quite play as well. The action was a lot of fun, and the story from what I remember was pretty good, but I did find myself feeling it was a bit repetitive, hence why I didn't continue with it back in the day, but I should give it another go. Thankfully for those who still want a copy, it's cheap online for consoles, though oddly more expensive on the PS2 than the Xbox, and it's easy to emulate on the PC. Due to the success of The Punisher on DVD, totaling its profits to over $110 million, talks began about doing a sequel with Hensley and Jane returning. The villain for the sequel would be Jigsaw, but he got stuck in development for 3 years. Jonathan Hensley completed a first draft of the script before pulling out around 2006. John Dahl was in talks to direct the film, but pulled out due to the quality of the script and the studio not wanting to spend too much money on the project. Thomas Jane would eventually leave the project due to creative differences. He was hoping Walter Hill would direct it, feeling he was the best to handle The Punisher. Thomas Jane said, "What I won't do is spend months of my life sweating over a movie that I just don't believe in." Punisher Warzone would eventually be made with Lexi Alexander directing and Ray Stevenson in the lead as Frank Castle and with Dominic West as Jigsaw. It hit cinemas in December of 2008, costing around $35 million. It was a box office flop, earning around $10 million and received negative reviews from the majority of the critics, with Roger Ebert writing a funny review, awarding it 2 out of 4 stars. He said, "You should be able to depend on a terrible film being poorly made, no longer. The Punisher Warzone is one of the best made bad movies I've seen." He added that the film's only flaw is that it's disgusting. I personally gave it a miss when it came out, but I did catch it recently, and I had mixed feelings on it. It suffers tonal whiplash as some of the actors appear to have been told to play it completely straight, and others to go full comic book. Dominic West seems to have taken inspiration from the villains of Dick Tracy. The film has a very ugly grade throughout, clearly altered digitally, and it looks like a mid-2000s music video. There is some odd framing going on. Most of the dialogue scenes consist of actors on the far left or far right of the frame. It results in a lot of empty space on opposite sides. Once I noticed it, it annoyed the shit out of me. But saying that, the action was hilarious and really entertaining, especially with the guys doing parkour. I couldn't stop laughing. Ray Stevenson was a really good Punisher. It's really good they actually made an effort to shoot in New York, and despite a number of problems, it was surprisingly a lot of fun to watch. And it doesn't outstay its welcome and whips along at a quick pace. It does suffer from dodgy editing during some scenes. It's like one of those Liam Neeson Taken sequels in places. You have 7 edits or so for the Punisher to walk through a door, or seeing people walking slowly, which slows down its runtime, so they just sloppily cut it up. It's fantastically shit. Objectively, the film is a bit crap, but you can watch it with your mates with some beers, and I guarantee you will have a blast watching it. Thomas Jane would return as the Punisher in 2012 in a short movie called Dirty Laundry, which also starred Ron Perlman. Produced by Adi Shankar, who put together a series of fan films, he would also the same year produce the Dredd film. This short film was screened at the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con. The 10-minute film was highly praised, with many seeing it as a love letter to the comic book, and many were hoping Thomas Jane would eventually return as the character on the big screen. We find Castle living in the back of his van, and he awakens from a nightmare and goes to get his laundry cleaned, but spots a woman being assaulted. He walks away seemingly ignoring the woman's cries for help. The gang then begin to start harassing a child. Frank eventually steps out and the gang tell him to leave, so he crosses the road and heads into a convenience store run by Ron Perlman. Frank is debating what to do. As Ron's character mentions, he once stepped in to help, but it didn't make a difference. Frank buys a bottle of Jack Daniels and brutally kills the gang members and lets the abused woman set the gang leader on fire. It's a great short movie, and despite being really violent, it's clearly made with love for the character, and it gives Jane one more time to play the Punisher, and it also makes use of Hans Zimmer's Dark Knight score, and it seems to fit well with the character. Thankfully the short hasn't been taken down, and you can find it on YouTube. In 2004, the Marvel superhero movies were on a roll. This was before the official MCU, so various studios and producers held the rights to different Marvel properties, so it wasn't all under one company like it is now. So from 1998 we had Blade under New Line Cinema, X-Men and Daredevil under Fox, Spider-Man under Sony, and Universal Pictures had the rights to The Incredible Hulk. Some fared better than others commercially and critically, with X-Men 2 and Spider-Man being the big hitters. Then came along The Punisher, a familiar character from the comics, but not a property that was family friendly. You can't market a 12 rated or PG-13 movie. One, it wouldn't fly with the fans, and the most interesting aspect of The Punisher would be heavily stripped of all of what makes him a violent anti-hero. So The Punisher is often going to be stuck with a smaller budget, so they can reduce the risk to keep the violence strong and not upset the fanbase. In the case of the 2004 film, it did receive an 18 rating and an R for the USA, but it wasn't too over the top like its sequel, but there was certainly enough violence in there to keep it strictly aimed at adults. But is the violence the only thing that keeps the character interesting? On face value, it may seem that way, but Jonathan Hensleigh tries to shift the basic approach to the character to a conspiracy to drive Howard Saint mad through Castle's actions, but Howard becomes increasingly paranoid about his business and the loyalty of his wife and closest ally, and he is forced to go to extreme measures. The Punisher could easily just burst through Saint's front door and start blasting everyone to bits, and it would be a lot of fun, but that would be a pretty short movie. So Frank uses his expertise to ruin Saint's business, and slowly gets close to him, and then goes in guns blazing for the finale, which had to be done because he is the Punisher. The setting of Florida has always been a bit of a problem for me. I understand why they changed the location, but it still doesn't really work. The city of Tampa just lacks the character of Manhattan. The majority of Castle's actions take place during the daytime, with him walking around in black and wearing a jacket. Firstly, he must be boiling hot, but also the Punisher is also a guy that mostly operates at night, when the criminals come out to play. Tampa also feels like a small city with only a few high-rise buildings, so the majority of the action and dialogue seems to take place near run-down buildings, or by the seafront like we're at some sort of holiday resort. It doesn't fit the urban gritty vibe that Jonathan Hensleigh wants to achieve. When you think of Florida, you don't instantly think of dark and gritty, you think hot, sunny and Disney. But Conrad Hall's cinematography in many scenes is fantastic. When it comes to showing Frank in a hero pose or the build up to an action scene, it looks amazing. It's all great photography, but in the wrong location. Despite Thomas Jane's reservations later on about playing the character, I don't recall anyone at the time having any beef with him playing the part. I think most people were impressed with his approach to the character. He has the physique and showed a man who was tortured by his loss and seeks revenge without any sense of joy. He is completely cold and Tom sells that really well. John Travolta is clearly having a lot of fun with the role. He is not over the top like he is in Broken Arrow and Face Off. He is controlled and reserved in this, but has these wild fits of anger. I do love it when he whips out a pipe to smoke. It's clearly an idea by Travolta to show the eccentric nature of Howard Saint. The film does have its dark humour and it works really well. One of the funniest moments is the torture scene with the ice lolly. But some of the best moments are with Travolta, where he throws his wife off the bridge to get run over by a train. It's a horrific scene but also funny at the same time, showcasing the strength of Hensleigh's dialogue. What I really appreciate about Jonathan Hensleigh's direction is how he made it feel like a 1970s action movie. It's not over the top and flashy, which was done to reduce the cost, but it also benefits the movie. The execution of the shootouts, punch-ups and car chases are straightforward. This is not me being negative, but these moments are clear and concise with how they are filmed. Nothing is confusing, the sequences are edited with a great rhythm, as the scenes all slot together like a perfect puzzle. The film does have the blood and violence, but does feel slightly reserved, to avoid going down a path of just violence for the sake of it. The torture scene with Dave, where you don't actually see that much, is masterfully done. It's incredibly tense as Quentin plays it very cool as he begins to punish Dave for not giving him Frank's whereabouts. Frank does get to set up his hideout, he hides weapons that could be easily accessed if he was attacked, and he gets his car jazzed up. It's all very cool, but once Frank gets to use his car, it doesn't last long. He spends ages doing it up, and once the hitman corners him, his muscle car gets wrecked, but it's back to normal magically by the end. This was one of the most disappointing moments for me. The attack on the car is great, and Frank takes out the hitman with a hidden knife, but I just wish there was a crazy car scene like in Ronin that was done by John Frankenheimer, which Jonathan Hensley's trying to homage. I want to see the Punisher either chase the bad guys or avoid being caught with an intense car chase that will leave you on the edge of your seat. I'm sure the director may have thought about that and wanted that, but the budget restraints soon become apparent as the action scenes feel a bit too short. As for the big finale, which is very entertaining, as he sends an explosive up in a dumbwaiter hidden in a wine bucket and takes out loads of bad guys in one go, and then comes up the stairs and shoots up the room. This only lasts for a few minutes. I don't think the film finds the right balance of action and drama. I think it leans too much on the story and Frank's attempts to make Saint paranoid and question those around him. The sequel Warzone tries to address that balance. I'm not saying Warzone is a better movie for doing that, but I think Jonathan may have not been fully aware of the fanbase and what appealed to them. As he wasn't familiar with the comics before he worked on a film, it's very much his interpretation of the character, and he tries to treat it with a sense of verisimilitude, which is great. But I think it loses some of that sense of fun and craziness you come to expect from the Punisher. The fight with the Russian is brilliant and a standout piece of the movie for me. Seeing Frank's head get slammed in the fridge door reminded me of the Bottom movie Guest House Paradiso, and the other scenes don't quite hit the heights of that fight. You want each action sequence to outdo the previous one, so by the end, you want it to be completely bonkers, but what we get feels compromised by the budget. There is a lot to enjoy about director Jonathan Hensley's take on the character. I respect the simple direction he takes the anti-hero. If you love 70s cinema, westerns, and even the parallels with Mad Max, the death of his wife is a great homage to the original 1979 film, you will appreciate the influence. It does have a couple of silly moments, mostly with Frank's housemates. They feel undeveloped and feel out of place in the serious direction they are taking. It's like they are trying to make an adult action film, but have to throw in a few scenes that feel aimed at a teenage audience that don't quite gel. We've had 3 theatrical Punisher movies, and they all have their pros and cons. The Punisher is a simple character with a familiar backstory. A guy's wife and child are killed, and he seeks revenge and justice in his own way. He is like Batman, but he goes out of his way to kill people. It's not a difficult character to translate to the big screen, but all of the film adaptations failed to do well financially or critically. Perhaps the anti-hero with extreme violence is not appealing to everyone, and the Punisher can't be made for a general audience because of the nature of what he does, so he will forever be trapped with this low mid-tier budget movie that always ends up being restricted. But also you have to make the Punisher likeable to an audience. The film has to be entertaining. If you make him too mean or bitter, it can be hard to root for him. I think Jonathan Hensley and Thomas Jane were going on the right path. I just think the budget restrictions, location and lack of villains from the comics did handicap the movie somewhat. If they had more flexibility, I think it could have been the best adaptation of the character yet. Others may disagree and feel this is the best Punisher feature film, and are happy with the end results, but I still think we haven't got there yet, despite the film having many strong elements. Overall, it's a well-made film. If you appreciate cinema of the past, you will respect what Jonathan Hensley does with the Punisher. It may be a bit too long in areas and lacks the lengthy and elaborate action scenes you'd come to expect from a Punisher adaptation, but it delivers enough conviction in the performances, especially from Thomas Jane, that makes you care for Frank Castle and his loss and his journey to seek justice in his own way, which I think the film nailed perfectly. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.